Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to Mexico, Puerto Morelos, and Valladolid. As often happens, once we had accepted there was nothing we could do about the taxi strike, we settled comfortably into our 3-hour flight to Cancun Airport. It occurred to me during the steward's announcement that airline staff must be the most optimistic people in the world. They always announce,
"We will shortly be landing at London Heathrow Airport. We hope you have enjoyed your flight."
Has anyone ever actually enjoyed a flight to anywhere? Flying is just something you have to do to get from one place to another. Surely most people would agree that a good flight is one that passes quickly and without incident. Nervous passengers are just happy to walk off the plane at the other end, but to actually enjoy a flight, you've got to be kidding. What did make me happy on that flight was when they announced the magic words, "If there is anyone who needs a transfer to their hotel on arrival, please let a flight attendant know." I hadn't realized that the airline offered that service, and it turned out to be cheaper than the one that we had originally booked. There was no chaos at the airport, although there were 3 big buses that were full, so one mother and her daughter asked if they could come with us to their hotel rather than wait an hour for the next bus. Of course, we were happy to oblige, as it was a minibus rather than a car. We arrived at the Corrales Suites apartment building in Puerto Morelos, and as I struggled through the awkward metal doors with 2 big suitcases, the young, healthy-looking receptionist just stood there looking at me. He wore a silly hat and had some kind of nervous tic, but was friendly enough while he was checking us in. He showed us to the foot of the stairs that led to our apartment and asked,
"Do you want help with your suitcases?"
It was on the 2nd floor, so of course I said yes. But I wondered if he was really prepared to just watch me as I struggled up the stairs with all our luggage. The apartment was excellent, with a living room, a large kitchen, and a side view of the sea, which was only a couple of minutes' walk away. We were shocked when we saw that our bath towels were not only in shreds, but both had stains on them, as well as one of the pillows. We asked for them to be changed, but nothing was done about it, so we gave up. The staff didn't seem very happy, and it had been my experience that unhappy staff was usually down to bad management. It was easier for us to accept the situation rather than spend the week fighting with them, and we didn't even want them servicing our room, as unhappy staff should be avoided at all costs. On the plus side, it made it easy to tell our towels apart. Federika had the towel with the black stain, and I gallantly accepted the towel with the more odious yellow stain. I insisted on taking the stained pillow, an act of true love. We had a nice balcony, but it was impossible to sit there at night as we could hear 2 or 3 televisions playing at the same time from the adjacent apartments. There were many eccentricities in the design of the apartment, like the bedroom light switch being at the far end of the room, so we had to cross the dark room to turn the light on. None of this bothered us in the slightest, as we knew we were going to enjoy our time there. It was already early evening when we walked along the beach to town and looked for a restaurant. The sea wasn't rough, so we were both looking forward to a swim the next day. We found a restaurant which played pleasant background music, making it the perfect evening. Afterwards, we walked through the lively town and stopped at a large supermarket to get some things for breakfast. Breakfast was always hit and miss wherever we travelled, so it would make a nice change to wake up in the morning and have whatever we wanted. In my case, in the absence of a full English, it was always granola, yogurt, fruit, and coffee. At the checkout, the girl told us they had no bags of any kind to pack our week's worth of groceries. Their reason was that, being a responsible supermarket, they didn't want to generate waste. All very clever, but the only way we could get our shopping home was to buy a pack of plastic rubbish sacks, which were twice the size of shopping bags, so twice the amount of plastic waste. Next day we went to the beach and accepted we had to pay the high price for the sunbeds, as neither of us was able to sit in the sun like we used to. Swimming was great, with the sea being warm, and I was able to indulge in my favourite sport of lying on a sunbed, reading before and after lunch, with a siesta in between. There was a man near the edge of the sea who was making sand sculptures. Federika asked him if he was an artist, but it turned out he was an American geologist who had lived in Mexico for 30 years. When I was young, we went 1 year on holiday to Weymouth, where there was a man who did amazing sand sculptures on the beach, but it was with heavy sand, so they lasted a long time. In Puerto Morelos, the sand was very fine, and there was a strong wind, so the sculptures only lasted a day or two, and he had to rebuild them. It was purely a labour of love, as he didn't ask for money. Between our apartment and the town, there was a long road with restaurants on either side of the street. Traffic was blocked off, so it should have been an excellent place to walk along and decide on which restaurant to eat. But for one problem: live music. Some places had just a guitar vocalist playing at a reasonable volume, but right next to him would be a 4-piece band playing Led Zeppelin so loud you couldn't hear the solo performer. At one place there were 4 restaurants together, each with a loud band. Each band was trying to be heard over the others, so there was a terrible cacophony of sound. People eating seemed to be oblivious to it all. But if I asked any of them if they would go to a concert where 4 groups were performing different songs on the same stage at the same time, they would think I was crazy. In one restaurant, a solo live performer was singing a few meters away from a television that was showing a Nicolas Cage film with the volume on. The next day we found a hotel beach club where we paid for a day pass, which entitled us to free use of sunbeds and an umbrella and a discount in the restaurant. It was a very good deal, so we ended up going there every day. Their music was pretty loud, but at least it was decent music with the bass drum under control, although some couples still came with a Bluetooth speaker and played their own music at full volume. That day we timed lunch well, as just as we sat down at a table, it started to pour with rain, and the restaurant quickly filled up. A young Italian couple asked if they could join us, and once I got over the initial horror of strangers at our table, we both enjoyed their company, as usually happens when we meet new people. He was a professional drummer who had lived in New York for 7 years before returning to Italy. I had wondered for years how musicians manage to work in the centre of cities these days with congestion fees and sky-high parking charges, so I was surprised when he told me that he went to gigs carrying his drum kit on the train. All the musicians he knew went to gigs on public transport carrying their instruments, sometimes with a little trolley if necessary. In my day, a car was just as important as an instrument, but then it was easy to find a free parking space, even in the centre of London. One lunchtime we returned to the restaurant where we had eaten on the first day. At last we found a place that served whole fish rather than fillets, and they confirmed that they would grill it for us. The waitress showed us the fish, which she said was called a robalo, which of course meant nothing to us. It was looking a bit sorry for itself, so I took a look at the gills and saw they had been removed. However, it was a reputable restaurant, so it never occurred to me that their fish wouldn't be fresh. When the time came to eat it, there was not even a hint of fishy taste, so we assumed that the robalo was just a crap fish that we would avoid in future. I was surprised to read on the internet later that the English name for robalo was a variety of sea bass, which was usually one of my favourite fish. At that point, I didn't know what to think. That night we ate at the best restaurant in town, and to my relief, a live keyboard player was performing. He was a reasonable singer and musician, and despite being quite young, was playing old jazz standards. Everyone was enjoying his music, and some couples even started dancing. Federika wasn't crazy about him because he didn't play any up-tempo songs, but she had to admit it was much more acceptable than the boom, boom, boom music. The food was excellent and a little bizarre, which we both liked. We chose a starter which had beetroot, pears, pumpkin seeds, and goat's cheese ice cream. Being a starter, we assumed it wouldn't be actual ice cream, but it was. It was very tasty, but it belonged firmly in the dessert department. For the main course, I had no trouble deciding on a giant pork rib, but when Federika asked what fresh fish they had, she was told they had robalo. After our last experience with the dreaded robalo, Federika was very nervous about ordering it again, but knowing now that it was a kind of sea bass, she decided to take a chance. It turned out to be so good that I regretted not ordering it, even if it was only a fillet instead of a whole fish. So now we knew for sure that the other restaurant had given us fish that was off and tasted more like sewer bass than sea bass. Each night we walk into town to eat and have a general stroll around. One night we ate at the Mem Al Mar restaurant, which was highly recommended by TripAdvisor. The music was a bit irritating, but it was bearable, so we ordered the seafood platter, which I always enjoy. Not only was the food not very good, but halfway through the meal, they turned the music up and started playing the worst techno music I had ever heard. There was only us and one other table who were about the same age, so I asked the manager if he would change the music. He agreed, but it only got worse after that. If you think I am exaggerating, take a listen to this and bear in mind it is supposed to be background music. The only music I had heard in Mexico so far was either boom 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 dance music or 80s heavy rock. Not a mariachi band in sight. Was I really the only tourist in Mexico who wanted to hear Mexican music while I was in Mexico? When deciding where to go on a holiday, we have a certain list of requirements. It must be hot, must have beaches where I am allowed to wear Speedos, and some sightseeing. Very low down on our list of requirements was war zones. Mexico seemed the logical place to go this year, as we were going to be in Seattle for Christmas, but I was a little concerned when Federika first suggested it because, as far as I was aware, there was an ongoing war between the government and the drug cartels. Federika pointed out that the government was very careful to protect its tourist industry, so none of the violence was in the tourist areas. There were many websites and posts that said the same thing, so I agreed to go. That was why I was surprised to see every day on our walk along the beach 3 National Guards, armed to the teeth, sitting under a shade. If the purpose of this was to reassure tourists, it didn't work with me. If drug gangs were stupid enough to cause trouble in front of highly trained soldiers, we would have been caught in the crossfire. As far as I was aware, the most effective security was that which you can't see. I wasn't worried about it, as we had been to plenty of countries where they had heavily armed police, but one morning at breakfast I searched for gang violence in Mexico and was surprised to see that innocent tourists had been killed in the most popular tourist areas of Tulum and Puerto del Carmen. Where there were tourists, there were drugs and gangs that were fighting over turf. With that in mind, on the way to the beach that morning, we saw a police van at the side of our path with 2 Marines and 2 National Guardsmen looking like they had stepped out of a Rambo film. I knew the chance of getting caught up in any serious violence was very slim, but I doubt if I would have gone to Mexico if I had read about all this in advance. I still wasn't worried about our safety, and it certainly didn't affect my enjoyment of the holiday. Que sera sera was always my favourite song, but I preferred to hear it in a country that was not at war. It was very windy most days, and there were periods when it was cloudy, so it got quite chilly, but most of the time it was hot and extremely pleasant. At night, we enjoyed watching the street dancers who went from restaurant to restaurant, performing with the most extraordinary acrobatics, which included spinning on their heads. On our last night, I got lucky while I was waiting for Federika outside a shop. A nearby restaurant had a large family celebrating a child's birthday when a mariachi band appeared, and the whole family joined in the singing. Unfortunately, they finished after a couple of songs and went on to their next gig, so I never saw them again. Towards the end of our stay in Puerto Morelos, we had to think about how to get to our next stop, Valladolid. In all our travels, it was always easy getting from place to place, and the only problem was choosing what mode of transport to use. Most of the time, we hired a taxi for the day at a very reasonable cost, but in Mexico, the cost was extortionate. Because of the stranglehold taxi drivers had on the market, it was said that they earned more than doctors. The only practical option was to hire a car, which we hadn't done for years. I wasn't keen on the idea as there was a minefield of extras, which included a gamble that nothing happened to the car. Even with full insurance, there were extras that were not covered, like tyres and windscreens. We got to the point where we just didn't care anymore and knew that with a car, we would be able to do the smaller day trips without worrying about how to get there. It was such a relief when we picked up the car, and we felt the freedom of going wherever and whenever we wanted.
Walk this way, don't hold back. The sooner the better, that's a fact. Lift your leg in time to the sounds. When it feels right, put it back down. Swing your arms like a crazy bird. It ain't no good if it ain't absurd. Skip to the front, skip to the side. Walk this way, you can save the pride.
Our drive to Valladolid was very pleasant, and thanks to the wonderful Google Maps, we were shown faultlessly to our next stop, the Casa Quetzal Hotel. Quetzal was the name of a bird that was very important in Mayan culture. That night we walked through the town, which consisted of some very pretty little restaurants, antique shops, and the usual souvenir shops. We bought a few little things, but the absurd prices made any bigger investment out of the question. There was a carving of a cow's face hanging on the wall with a wonderful expression that suggested an apology for its recent contribution to greenhouse gas. We both loved it and would have bought it, but couldn't bring ourselves to pay £100 for something that would normally cost around £20 at most. A little further on was a large town square with a park in the middle where there was always something going on. We had dinner in a lovely old restaurant with a high ceiling and a Mexican singer in a face mask playing a Spanish guitar. He was playing horrible sing-along songs that I suppose he thought tourists wanted, but everyone was ignoring him. I think out of desperation, he played a song from the Buena Vista Social Club, which suited him much better, so he became a joy to listen to. I applauded eagerly when he finished, and as usually happens, all the other diners clapped, so from then on he played only Spanish songs that everyone liked. The hotel served breakfast every morning in the lovely inner courtyard with lots of plants and the delightful sound of birds singing. What a great way to start the day. On our first morning, we drove eagerly to one of the 7 wonders of the world, the ancient Mayan ruins of Chichen Itza. Our hotel receptionist warned us about scams on the way, so when groups of Mexicans stepped out and waved us over, we were ready for them. They all had official-looking badges, and with great authority, they stepped out and told us to pull over. To their great annoyance, we ignored them and drove on. It turned out that they were guiding tourists to off-site parking spaces, which they charged for, despite the official car park being much closer to the ruins and free. Just as we were parking our car, several men with badges approached us, offering their official guide service. We wanted a guide anyway, so after agreeing on a price, the man asked us to give him the fee for his service, plus the £50 entry fee. There was no logical reason to give him the entrance fee, so I refused, and he lost interest. We had no trouble finding a genuine guide at the entrance. I always find it breathtaking when I first catch sight of one of these world-famous places. The main ruin was at the entrance, and our guide explained all the stuff about astrology, which the Mayans were really into. The thing to do was to stand in front of it and clap your hands, which had a very strange echo effect. Many years earlier, it had been possible to climb up the steps, but it was no longer permitted. That was just as well, as I wouldn't have been able to resist the temptation to climb up, which might well have resulted in my having to be airlifted down. Of particular interest to me was the arena where warriors played a weird ball game called pits. It consisted of two teams running around at ground level and a captain on each side running along a ledge a couple of meters above the players. The ball was made of solid rubber, was 6 inches wide and weighed about 3 kilos. The object of the game was for players to pass the ball to each other until they could throw it up to the captain, who had to throw it through a small concrete hoop that was 3 meters up the wall. The tricky bit was that players were not allowed to use their hands or feet when passing the ball. It seemed impossible to me that anyone could throw such a large, heavy ball through such a small concrete hoop, but evidently they did. A game could last anything between an hour and a week. The most extraordinary thing was the prize. The captain of the side that won was given the grand honor of having his head cut off. They believed in reincarnation, so winning such a big prize meant they came back as something really cool, like a god or a guitarist. Maybe the guide was exaggerating, and the winner just got slapped around a bit. Our tour guide was Mayan and so had a good knowledge of his culture and the ruins. Before leaving the site, we looked around at the stalls where they were selling some nice things, but also expensive. There were literally hundreds of stalls, and during the 3 hours we were there, I never saw a single person buying anything. Many of the articles were very well made, and they might well have been worth the asking price, but I don't think people go to these places with the intention of paying hundreds of dollars for souvenirs. Our next stop was the nearby cenote. Cenotes are underground caves or waterways. Tsukan advertised an attractive-looking restaurant, but despite being in the middle of the tourist season, it was closed for renovations. Our only option was a small hut selling snacks, where the choice was tacos or nachos. There were lots of cenotes around Mexico, and I suppose all of them had different things to offer. At Tsukan, the facilities were very good, offering substantial changing rooms and a tourist shop. We got changed, put our clothes in a locker and took a compulsory cold shower before going into the water. It was compulsory for everyone to wear life jackets, which seemed a bit over the top considering there was also a lifeguard on duty and a total absence of waves or strong currents. To get to the cenote, we had to walk down a lot of stone steps that started in the bright sunshine and got cooler as we went further underground. The cenote was a large cave with a hole in the top, which lit up the area. All around the cave were impressive stalactites that didn't quite touch the water. Being so deep underground, I assumed the water was going to be freezing, but although far from being thermal, it was perfectly acceptable. I quite liked wearing the life jacket, as it removed the obligation to swim. I could just float around and admire the surroundings like in a dream. We enjoyed it, but there was only so much floating around you can do, so after 10 minutes we got out and were happy to get back to the warm sunshine. Next to our hotel, there was a convent with a large lawn in front, and on the way back from dinner one night, we found they were projecting a very impressive video onto the front of the building. They were narrating a detailed history of the building, which was very interesting and involved lots of killing. On our second day, we went to another famous ruin, Ek Balam. A few kilometers before the entrance, there were men blocking the road with traffic cones, demanding money for various services. By now, we had got wise to the scam, so when they realized I was going to run over their cones, they quickly moved them out of the way. The police must have been aware of this highway robbery, so I assumed they just didn't care. We didn't bother with a guide this time, and whilst it was a pleasant visit, it was a bit of a come-down after Chichen Itza. What was surprising was that, despite charging the same entrance fee as Chichen Itza, in Ekbalam there was not a single notice in front of any ruin, let alone an explanation. After lunch we went to the local cenote. It was within walking distance of the ruins, and cost a fraction of the Tsukan cenote. I wasn't expecting much, but it turned out to be much better. The facilities were rustic and falling to pieces, but that added to its charm. We changed in a unisex wooden hut before showering and walking along a dirt road to the cenote, which was much bigger, brighter, and more fun than the underground cenote the day before. Instead of stalactites, there were roots of trees hanging 30 meters into the water. There was a makeshift wooden platform going around the perimeter and a string bridge that was impossible to get across without laughing. There were various ropes that people could swing into the water with, and a zip line going from one side to the other for the more adventurous. Life jackets weren't compulsory, so I had to work a bit in the water, but it felt great, floating around amongst the tree roots. One irritation of Valladolid was that until the early hours every night, we had to endure the incessant boom, boom, boom of a bass drum from a club 2 kilometers away. We couldn't hear a note of music, just the bass drum, like someone was hammering on the ceiling. Youngsters had played music too loud for generations, but this obsession with bass that travelled 10 times further than the music it supported was new. I really didn't understand why a few dozen people in a club should be allowed to disturb the peace of the thousands of people within a few kilometre radius. On our last day in Valladolid, we went to an exhibition called La Casa de los Venados. It was the private house of an American couple called John and Dorian Venator, who had been collecting Mexican art for 50 years. The house was magnificent, and not only did the owners still live in it, but they also used to pop out during the tours and say hello to people. Unfortunately, in the last few years, Dorian Venator had developed dementia, so she started walking around asking what all the strangers were doing in her house. She no longer made an appearance, but I did see the back of John Venator walking into a room. It was jam-packed with interesting and beautiful exhibits, and I particularly liked the dining room set. They had created a charity for the house, so that all the proceeds went to local projects, and when they died, the house would be left in trust for the benefit of the community. Through all their years of collecting, they only ever bought directly from Mexican artists. What an admirable couple! The house had been in ruins for many years before it was renovated, and that in itself was a work of art. For our last lunch, we went to a highly recommended, authentic Mayan restaurant, Ik, that Federika found in the Lonely Planet book. It was beautifully designed, and on our way to our table, we passed a little straw hut where a woman was sitting on the floor making tacos in the traditional Mayan method. To my delight, they were playing music that was appropriate to the restaurant. It wasn't really music, but more like the sound effects from a genuine Mayan village with the occasional flute and voices in the background. How rare it was to find an owner who actually thought about what was played over the loudspeakers. We had no idea what we ordered for a starter, as it was full of things we had never heard of, but it was excellent, with such interesting flavours. For the main course, I had some kind of prawn thing in thick, cheesy chili sauce with other things I had never heard of. Federika had a pork dish, which had been cooked very slowly underground for a few hours. It wasn't her normal choice, and she was disappointed with it, but it was chosen more out of nostalgia for a dish she used to have in Peru called pachamanca. The dessert was spectacular, and despite sharing it, we still struggled to finish. It was our most enjoyable meal since arriving in Mexico, but ironically, something upset my stomach, which was very unusual. In all our travels, including 3 tours of India, the last stomach upset I had was in Brazil 15 years ago. I assumed it must have been something in the cheese sauce, as Federika had some of the prawns and they didn't affect her. But even on the rare occasion that I did get a stomach upset, it was no big deal, and the next day I was okay.
Strange happenings. Strange happenings. Strange happenings. Strange happenings. Strange happenings.
It was another pleasant drive to our final stop at the Villas de Rosa beach resort in Akumal in Yucatan. We had intended to leave the car at Tulum, but it all got so complicated with transfers that we extended the car hire for an extra 5 days so we could use it to get to the airport on the last day. We went to the car hire office in Tulum to do the paperwork, which worked out well as we could visit the ruins while we were there instead of having to make a special trip. Once again, at the entrance to the ruins, there were banditos on the road, but by then I was confident enough to ignore their police officer impersonations and drive straight to the ruins. It was very hot, and unlike our other ruin visits, there was no wind, so I spent most of my time looking for shade. It wasn't that long ago that the heat never affected me, but in the previous few years that seems to have changed. The ruins were much the same as any other ruins, and there was very little information, but the setting was lovely and overlooked the sea. In the car park we noticed another attraction called Mystika, which we hadn't heard of, but as the reviews were very good, we thought we would give it a try. It was an exhibition by the Mexican photographer, José Luis Cuevas. It consisted of a lot of his award-winning photographs and 4 experiences inside closed rooms. The photos were amazing, although I wished he had just let the photos tell the story instead of including lots of horribly pretentious explanations beside each one. For our first experience, a woman locked us in a dark room, which was a little scary, as apart from the claustrophobia, there was the danger of frostbite from the air conditioning. The lights came on, and a video was projected onto a dome-shaped ceiling. It took us flying over oceans and mountains with a soundtrack that reverberated dramatically deep inside the belly. It was a great experience, although I would have enjoyed it much more if they had provided blankets. The other rooms were full of mirrors with videos projected onto them with New Age music, and the temperature was much more acceptable. As Federika walked towards a mirror, she was split into dozens of clones, so even the smallest movement was spellbinding. One of the rooms was so good we asked to go back for a repeat performance. I think I could have spent the rest of the day in that room. Before leaving Tulum, we went to a large supermarket to stock up on food for our last 5 days. We had booked an apartment, and although we were not going to do any cooking, there were always times towards the end of a holiday when we had a craving for something simple like soup or the bliss of a bacon sandwich. Most of Yucatan was known to be horribly built up with all-inclusive hotels and non-stop parties, so we were careful to find an area far away from all that. Our hotel was 4 kilometers from Akumal, which was itself a small town. Our first-floor apartment was magnificent, with a large sea-facing terrace and an even larger living room. It had a well-equipped kitchen, and the only negative was that our bedroom was at the back with no natural light or ventilation. For security, we were advised to keep our balcony doors closed while we were asleep, so our bedroom did get a bit stuffy. We were in the middle of nowhere, with just a few houses down our street and no shops, so we missed walking around at night. We settled into a lazy routine and had no trouble getting sunbeds and an umbrella that was supplied by the hotel. The sea was perfect, and although it was quite rough getting in and out, once we were past the breaking waves, the swimming was easy. It was the rough sea that I liked the most, as the noise drowned out any noise made by other guests. During our customary sunset stroll, we saw some men standing by the seashore, with one of them casting a hand fishing line. It was impossible to throw very far, so I couldn't imagine what fish he hoped to catch. But when we got close, I saw a bucket full of hermit crabs, which I assumed were good for eating. 2 kilometers from us, at the end of the beach, there was a fairly big hotel complex, which was surprising, as unlike our part of the beach, it was impossible to swim because of all the shallow rocks. On our last morning we woke to find it pouring with rain, and it was heavily overcast, but by 10 o'clock it suddenly brightened up, and we had yet another beautiful day where the only thing we had to do was move the sunbeds around to catch the shade. Having the car meant we were able to go to Akumal beach for our last dinner, so we went to another highly recommended Italian restaurant called La Taverna. We arrived early to walk around and check out the beach, but were unable to find it. There must have been one there somewhere, but all we could find was a row of private houses in a national park where you had to pay to get in. The restaurant was excellent, and it wasn't long before it was packed with tourists escaping from tacos. We had a very good waiter from Argentina who did a great job of selling us their special starter of the day, which was French fries with parmesan and a few other very exotic-sounding things. It turned out to be a plate of French fries with 7 grains of parmesan and garlic that could be smelled from 4 tables away. In fairness, they were great French fries, so I put a plate on top to keep them warm, and they went brilliantly with our main course, a lovely grilled fish. Our flight from Cancun wasn't until late afternoon, so for once we had plenty of time. We planned to get to the airport 3 hours before our flight, but by 11 o'clock we started getting bored, so we thought we might as well wait at the airport rather than the apartment. We were driving for 15 minutes when it started raining so heavily that even with the wipers on full speed, they couldn't keep up with it. 10 minutes later, the roads were flooded, and in some places, the water was up to the top of the car tires. It was very difficult driving, but there was no choice but to plough on. My main concern was that the car broke down in the middle of a giant puddle. That used to happen all the time in the old days, but I was hoping that cars had improved and were better sealed against the water, which thankfully seemed to be the case. None of the cars or lorries had mud flaps, so every time we were overtaken, it was like someone had thrown a 1,000,000-litre bucket of water over us. We thought it might just be a short downpour, but at the petrol station, the attendant assured us that once it got started like that, it would rain for days on end. At one point, the GPS said we were only 10 kilometers from the airport, but the time of arrival was 1 hour. Thinking there must be a fault with the GPS, we continued until suddenly we hit a wall of traffic. The traffic was in 3 lanes and there was a high lorry in front of us, so I felt quite claustrophobic. By now I was really hungry, and the only thing we had was biscuits and crisps, which I hate eating on an empty stomach. My biggest problem was that I wanted to pee so badly that it was physically painful. What with the hunger and the fear of an exploding bladder, I was starting to feel anxious, which wasn't helped by the knowledge that if I started to feel unwell, Federika wouldn't be able to drive, as the car was an automatic. Despite us moving slowly but steadily, every time I looked at the GPS, it said it was still another hour to the airport. I would have happily got out and peed up against the car, but it was raining so heavily that I would have got drenched and had to sit in wet clothes for the next hour. The only bottle we had was Federika's favourite metal water bottle, but she insisted I use it even though it meant throwing the bottle away afterwards. I had no choice but to sacrifice the bottle, and although it was incredibly awkward to urinate while sitting down and driving at the same time, I managed to get some temporary relief. When we finally reached the car hire depot, I got soaked getting out of the car, and although they charged us extra for heaven knows what, I was past caring and all I wanted was to complete my pee and get into some dry clothes. Checking in was painless enough, but the Cancun airport made me realize how much we take most modern airports for granted. Normally, we walk down long corridors to get to departure gates, so passengers are separated. At Cancun airport, there was only one area with all the gates in a circle around the building. It created a solid mass of people, and with every single shop playing its own loud music, it was bedlam. Our flight was an hour late, which wasn't bad, as a lot of the other flights were cancelled, leaving passengers walking around like zombies, wondering what to do next. It was a 6-hour flight with Delta Airlines to Seattle, and it was the first time I had been on such a long flight without being served some kind of hot food. Our only option was a chicken roll that we had to pay for. Federika heard one of the air hostesses say she was too hot, and the next thing we knew, the temperature in the plane dropped dramatically. We were both freezing, which was ironic because I had paid extra for the Comfort Plus package. One flight attendant told us there weren't any blankets, but then Federika persevered, and eventually another attendant magically produced 2 blankets, so we were able to thaw out. It was the first and last time we would ever fly Delta Airlines. As always, I really enjoyed our holiday, but I wasn't very impressed with Mexico. I was sure it was a wonderful holiday destination many years ago, but mass tourism had taken a heavy toll. I didn't mind the food and the high prices because there was an element of choice, but having inappropriate music forced on me everywhere we went was unacceptable. We stayed in 5 different hotels, all out of town, and in all of them we could hear the boom, boom, boom of dance music from our room or balcony every night. On the beaches, we frequently had to move when people sat next to us with their music blaring. In some places, we could hear music from several Bluetooth speakers playing at the same time. Our last 4 days in Seattle were very pleasant but uneventful. We went to the Woodland Park Zoo one day, where it was refreshing to see the change in the treatment of animals since my first trip to London Zoo when I was 7 years old. Our long journey home included an overnight stay at a Heathrow hotel so we could rest before our flight to Croatia the next day. We were both looking forward to getting home, but as always happens with me, walking back from the plane to collect our luggage, I had a feeling of anticlimax and an urge to go to an airline desk to book a flight to somewhere else. Over the years, that urge had diminished along with my energy level, but it was still there. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Vienna and Prague.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.